Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the channel. I am so delighted to be here today with some very special guests, and I'm going to introduce them first. But first, I'm just going to mention that we are doing a discussion of The Green Knight, the film. So the poem, Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, will probably come up a few times as well, but the majority of the discussion is going to be about the film, which we have all seen and we are eager to discuss. So I have here with me today David Dessereau.
Hey, everybody.
And we have Evie here as well. And many of you may have seen the video I did with Evie where we talked about the poem. So we're really set up pretty well for this, I think, right, Evie?
I think so.
Good. And then we have Johanna.
Hi.
And many of you will recognize Johanna, I'm sure, from some of my other discussions with her, both on my channel and hers. We had our Tolkien talk finally, so that was great. And we also have John, who has joined us. Now, John does not have a channel, but he's very active on BookTube. Some of you might know him from Alan's Discord, the Library of Alexandria. So John, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Happy to be here.
All right, great. Well, it's just great to see you all. And I'm really eager to hear your impressions of this film. Just want to say for our viewers that we're going to start with some very non-spoiler general observations and our assessments of the film, whether or not we would recommend people see it or what kinds of people we would recommend it to. And after we finish with our general stuff, we are going to launch into spoilers, but we will warn you before we talk spoilers in case you haven't seen the film yet. So I'm just gonna make a few general observations myself, and then I want to ask each of you for your assessments. In regard to the poem does some things that I really appreciated how the film carried over. There's some really great, in the original poem from the 14th century, Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, there's a lot of great stuff with the combination of pagan and Christian in there. And that's a great theme. There's also the fact that the original poem is very gently subversive. This is something that Evie and I talked about when we discussed the poem. And it portrays the difficulty of living up to ideals, social ideals. And it is, in a way, I call it sort of humanistic, and I really like that. And what I mean by that is it presents a very flawed, a very vulnerable, and very relatable protagonist in Sir Gawain, I think. So something that I really appreciate. And there's also an outer and an inner journey in the original poem. All these things are things I think that the film duplicates in some ways or others, and I really appreciate that. And there's also, I think there are elements in the original poem also of course, quest, but there's also some horror elements in there. And these are, and plenty of chances for growth. And these again are things that the film takes up, I think, pretty skillfully. And in the process with some really incredible cinematography and I thought some great acting as well. So those are my just sort of general non-spoiler impressions, but I want to get you guys, what are your impressions? And perhaps we could start with Johanna. Would you like to start us off with your impressions of the film, The Green Knight?
Yeah, sure. I really enjoyed the movie. I thought it was really well done. I think it was a bit darker in tone than maybe what I expected, but I still appreciated that. And even though it certainly seems to take place in that setting, sort of the 14th century setting, I don't know how accurate it is.
Not very.
Not very.
No.
Okay, yeah. Well, we have castles.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, and we have an axe, and we have, certain elements, I guess, that you can see in the poem. But it certainly felt very modern to me. It had a very modern feel to me. And even just, and I don't know how much of this is accurate to say, but I felt like even the characters, even like the main protagonist to me felt like kind of a modern interpretation of that character, but we can get into that later. But overall, I really enjoyed it. And even just some of the ways that it was a departure from the poem, I actually appreciated some of the more interesting choices there. So I'll just say that for now.
Cool. Yeah, it is. I totally agree with you, by the way, that it is very modern and feel, even though it has a sort of medievalish setting, but is a very surreal experience, the film. And it's don't go into it thinking you're gonna see a lot of action. It's an art film, really, I would say, for the most part. So yeah. I definitely agree with your general assessment there. Thank you. So who's next? John, how about you? What were your general impressions of the film, The Green Knight?
Well, I overall loved it. I would say as far as movies go, it's my favorite that I've seen this year.
Wow.
I do think this is a movie that as soon as you walk out of the theater, you probably won't know what to make of it. You have to kind of like mull things
Yes.
over for a little while because it's
Yeah.
very ambiguous towards a lot of, the themes and how you're supposed to feel about, Gawain and a lot of, the people in the movie. But the more I sat on it, the more that I realized, because I kept thinking about it, was the reason why I loved it so much. And I think that Gawain is very relatable in his, it is kind of like a coming of age story for him.
Yeah.
On his kind of, quest, to do, basically to be what is what makes a knight, and then being heroic makes a knight to him. And I do think, a lot of the, like, Philip, you mentioned the technical aspects, like the cinematography is like really, really beautiful.
Yeah.
I mean, some of the practical, effects that they used and the color and everything just made it feel very like lived in. It didn't feel like they were kind of just using like a set. It felt like a real place. And I do think they shot a lot of it on location in the UK, which was nice.
Yeah.
But I liked it so much that I went and saw it again last night.
Wow.
And not just because we were talking about it, because I wanted to, because I liked it that much. And I got probably more out of it the second time than I did the first time.
Cool. Yeah, visually, it's a gorgeous film. And I totally agree with you. That's a great word to use in the context of this film, ambiguity. There's a ton of ambiguity in here. Yeah. So thank you for that. That's excellent. How about you, Evie? What did you make of the film? I've been very curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, so actually, very similarly to John, because actually that's how John came up in this conversation, because we were talking about the film on Alan's Discord, and for me, it felt like, to use John's term of ambiguity, but for me, to be more specific, the film felt and gave me a very literary experience where I felt a depth of really everything and all the imagery, and I want to see it again, because I'm sure there are things that I missed and other interpretations that I could see on viewing it a second time. And as was mentioned, I really liked the cinematography. I think it was gorgeously shot. And while it does feel modern in a way, in regards to characterizations and stuff like that, it still felt very true to the text. It was honoring the source material very much so, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree with that. Nice. Excellent. So we'll talk about some of those themes in a bit too, but first I really want to hear, David, your thoughts on The Green Knight. So what did you make of it?
So I really enjoyed it. Just like John said, this is probably my favorite movie of the year.
Wow.
One of the ways I've described it to friends is basically, it's a slow burn. Just expect, a couple hours of pure atmosphere. Appreciate that. And then there's a nice message at the end. And that's how I've been kind of telling people, like, that's what to expect. It's for a very particular kind of fantasy fan. So, I mean, if you're not really, like, I have a friend who complains that fantasy sometimes is too slow. I was like, okay, well, this one, you're not going to enjoy this one. This is all about just enjoying the moment and the entire journey, every step of the way. It's nice and slow. And then the fact that A24 actually produced this film is what got me excited, because they're well known for their horror and just kind of letting their directors do what they want. And they really let artists be artists. So you mix this old fantasy poem with a studio that's kind of known for horror. That is right up my alley. So I totally enjoyed it. It actually, by the time it was over, I was still kind of thinking, like, well, what does this mean? Like, I have my own interpretations that I'll leave for the spoiler section.
Cool.
But I will say I stayed up probably till I watched like a late showing, but I stayed up probably till 1 a.m, just like in my living room thinking about like, what does this all mean? And like the impact that this movie can have, and just there's so much to take in. Yeah, I really enjoyed it.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I was not familiar with A24 before this film, and that tells you how little I know about films and cinema and television and all that. I also had not heard of David, is it Lowery or Lowry, however you say his last name, the director. I don't know if any of you know how to pronounce it or not.
I'm not
I
sure.
believe it's Lowry.
Lowry, okay, I would go with
Yep.
Lowry. Okay, so yeah, but I did read up a little bit about what he does, and the horror element was something definitely was played up in here. Let's talk a little bit before we get into actual spoilers. And whoever feels like following up on this question, go ahead. We don't have to go in a specific order, but John mentioned the coming of age theme, which is definitely there. Let's identify a few other themes for people who were potentially might want to see this film. Nature versus civilization, I think, is a big one as well, which is definitely in the original poem. And that is carried over really nicely, I think, in the film, and in ways that I was very pleased with. That it was done subtly, but very effectively, I thought. And we can talk about that in more detail when we get to the spoilers. But are there other important themes in here? I think masculinity is perhaps one. But what are themes that did you guys pick up on that we could mention before we get into actual spoilers?
I think they talk a lot about the virtues of being a knight. I don't think it's
Yes.
too spoilery to say,
Yeah.
it's about being a good person. I think that's something they really hit on.
Yeah, being a decent human being. Yeah, definitely. So there is a it's not that it hits you over the head with it, but there is a moral component, I think, to the story, especially in terms of Sir Gawain's interactions with the other characters that he knows and that he meets along the way, and the decisions that he makes. So good. Any other themes that we want to mention in a non-spoilery way before we get into those spoilers?
Yeah, there are also more overt depictions and correlations and juxtapositions between pagan belief and Christian belief or practice. So I thought that was a very very well done aspect of it.
I totally agree. Yeah. Anything else?
I mean, it goes without saying that temptation is obviously a big
Yes.
one in there.
Yeah, temptation in a big way. Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. And in several respects too. And we can't talk about it in detail without spoilers, but temptation is certainly a big theme. And what it means to be a human being. Yeah. Yeah. To be frail, to be flawed, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say, and also morality in a way, or mortality, I should say. Well, mortality.
Both. Yeah.
But yeah.
Both.
Yeah, mortality is huge. You're right, Evie. It's a
Mhm.
very, I love how they played that up in the film. Absolutely. Yeah. Good. Anything else? All right. I think
just kind of close. I think close to what David and Johanna were saying, but just doing the right thing. I
yeah.
think there's a lot of, basically most of the movie is Gawain being presented with opportunities to do the right thing, and what decisions does he make based off of that?
Yeah. And like many fantasy heroes, he doesn't always make the right choice.
Right.
Speaking of which, I think we're ready for our spoilers. So let us warn our viewers, everybody, if you don't want to hear any spoilers for the film, then thank you very much for listening thus far. And we hope to see you again. So, and don't forget to check out all of their channels. And I will put a link in the description below for you to check out their channels. So I definitely encourage you to do so. All right, are you guys ready? All right, so shall we start with, since I think that's a nice segue that John just gave us, should we start with Sir Gawain, and let's give our assessment of him. I'll just briefly say myself that the major difference I found between the original poem and the film was that even though Sir Gawain in the poem was vulnerable, he was human, he had his flaw, he was attached to his life. I would say that the Sir Gawain we get in the film is far more vulnerable, far more flawed than the one we get in the poem. And actually, he makes a bunch of stupid decisions along the way, and he seems singularly incompetent.
Oh yeah,
That's fair.
In many respects. Do you guys agree with that?
100%. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, because in the poem, I don't know, it seemed to me like he was very skilled in kind
Yes.
of dancing around the temptations there. And in the film, honestly, that character, I had mixed feelings when I was watching the film. But then when I thought about it, the more I thought about it, the more I loved it for this.
Yeah.
It made me so uncomfortable. I felt so uncomfortable watching that movie because of that character. And just seeing this young man, because it felt to me, like I said, a very modern portrayal of like a young 20-something-year-old man who he seems like, he doesn't have a father figure really in his life.
Right.
And he seems obviously to have a little bit of a strange relationship with his mother. We can go on about her.
Oh yeah, we got to talk about mommy here today. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Who I'm guessing is Morgan Le Fay in this film. I don't know if that's a possible interpretation, but
Yes.
there's a lot to say there.
I'm glad that you had the same thought process as me. I'm like, is she supposed to be?
That's what I wondered. It felt like, yeah, it was interesting. So, but the thing is, I mean, he's somebody who, he just like the first scene or the beginning of the movie when he claims he was at mass all night. She's like, oh yeah, you smell like you've been drinking the sacrament all night, and he's been having sex. And so he's like a young guy who's kind of lost, doesn't have a father figure. He's finding his way through sex and alcohol. But there's a part of him that wants to be more, to live for more, to go through sort of a rite of passage.
Yeah.
And that's what this whole quest sort of turns into.
Yeah.
But even then, I mean, it just seemed like, I'm sorry, I'm probably going to jump ahead. I don't mean to jump ahead too much, but it seems like he's just questioning himself, even with, I cannot remember, with the master of the house. I'm drawing a blank of the name.
Well, in the poem, he's named Bertilac, but in the movie, he's not named in the movie, I think. Yeah.
No, he's not named. No. And, even when Bertilac asks him, why are you doing this? And you're not very good at answering questions, are you? And he basically, because he says, oh, for honor. Yeah, it's for honor. But he even still seems lost. Like you said, I love how you described him, Philip, as being kind of incompetent. Yeah. And he just seemed to be very, very lost and very young. And that made me so uncomfortable. But I felt like it was so realistic and modern to me, like that sort of interpretation of that character.
Brilliant. Yeah, I agree. He's pampered and directionless when we meet him. So, and he's kind of given more than a nudge out the door by I think mommy and by his uncle, King Arthur. So, but I want to hear what everyone else thinks about Sir Gawain. So, David, what did you think of our protagonist?
Yeah, I think a lot of what you guys are touching on has a lot to do with the major change that I've noticed from the poem to the movie, and that in the poem, he's already a knight. So he's already has some idea of what he's doing, versus the movie where he hasn't become a knight yet. He's younger, he's capable of making a lot more mistakes. and that totally, just like Johanna was saying, it adds to the tension. And this being an A24 film and it being a slow burn, it just works perfect. I mean, he's young, you kind of get the feeling like, oh man, right from the beginning when he's partying all night, and now he has to go on, before he even goes on the quest, actually, when you see 1 year pass like that, and his life isn't any better, like he's done this deed, he has a little bit of fame, and hasn't really done anything with it. And he's just been partying. Year went by just like that, and you're kind of like, oh, he's irresponsible. And now he has to go on a quest where he might lose his head. Oh no. And it's just, you kind of feel for him because he's young and he's still figuring it out, but you consistently see him mess up. Like he goes out in the middle of nowhere, he finds that kid who tells him the directions, and then he doesn't offer him any coins. And then that turns around and bites him really fast. And then, it's just one thing after the other. He just keeps messing up. But I like how by the end, he does kind of realize how he's been messing up.
Yeah.
And he has that moment of his whole life just flashes forward through his eyes. And you get to see where his mistakes will lead him and why he is kind of like, oh, okay, I realize where I messed up. Go ahead, do it. And then it's like, there's a nice moment there.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, we definitely have to talk about that ending for sure. So I'm glad you raised it. But yeah, I mean, there's that moment early on too when Arthur asks him, tell me a story about yourself, because I don't really feel like I know you, nephew. And he's like, I don't have a story. So that tells you that he hasn't lived a very fulfilled life thus far. And he's perhaps the motive behind mommy and uncle booting him out the door is to, help him to grow up, to get a story. So yeah. So let's see, Evie and John, we haven't heard your thoughts fully yet on Sir Gawain. Do you want to add anything to what we've said so far? Evie first, maybe?
Yeah. So to kind of piggyback off of everything, I was actually one of the first things that I noticed is that he's wanting to become a knight rather than already a knight to prove his greatness as a knight. He just wants to prove himself to be able to become one.
Yes.
But the thing that I think I really liked and the most about not just the character, but the portrayal of the actor of the character, is not just the vulnerability, but the character arc of this selfish, though wayward young man to a very determined, selfless man by the end. So
yeah, in his final act, perhaps. Yeah, great. John, anything to add to thoughts on young Gawain?
I think one of the biggest things, and we've talked about how he feels more of like a modern character, is how relatable he is. I mean, he screws up pretty much throughout the entire movie.
Yes, he
even
does.
when he's given pretty easy opportunities not to do so. Whether he can give one coin to someone he meets along the road who gives him advice, or helping out Winifred, but instead he asks if she'll pay him, basically, he still can't quite do the right thing. And I really like that. I like when characters are like flawed like that, where they're not just going to always make the right decisions, but I think it adds more depth to them.
Yeah.
And I think, adding to something Johanna said about his lack of father figure, I think a part that I really liked at the beginning was Arthur inviting him to sit next to him at the table, and he was like almost taken aback by that, because it's clear that they've never really had a very close relationship, and that was the first time maybe Arthur had asked him to do something kind of more fatherly. And he said that, I think he said, that's not my place. And he said, well, it is for today. And it was on Christmas, which is obviously in the story a very like important day of celebration. So him having that spot, I think would mean a lot to him.
Yeah, it's a great moment, and a key thing is not a word spoken, but is the reaction of the other knights around the table, and they're kind of like, you can tell they don't think a lot of young Gawain just yet. But nevertheless, Arthur is trying to give him this opportunity. But we mentioned mommy earlier, and I do think that that's a valid interpretation, that the film that a couple of you mentioned, I think it was Johanna and Evie, the film seems to be presenting Morgan as Sir Gawain's, or Gawain, he's not a Sir yet, as Gawain's mother, interestingly, because I think the connection there is she is wearing the blindfold and doing the magic in the beginning, and she seems to be almost constructing the journey, the quest that Sir Gawain is going to be going on. And later, when he goes to the castle or the palace or whatever of Bertilac in the poem, but just the Lord in the movie, you do see the crone who is revealed to be Morgan Le Fay, and she's also wearing the whatever it is, a sash or whatever. Sash plays a big role too, right? Because it's his mother who gives him the sash. This is not in the poem at all. His mother initially gives him the sash. He doesn't see a sash until very late in the poem, when the lady of the castle offers it to him. So to have the mother offer him this sash. It's incredibly potent, I think, and very symbolic, especially when you see what they do at the end when he's seeing that vision that David mentioned of his life sort of unraveling in front of him as he's about to die. And there's that point where he's taking the sash and it's coming out of his stomach. And it's almost like it's an umbilical cord that connected him with his mother.
I
Isn't
hadn't
it?
thought about that. Wow.
I mean, that's what my wife and I thought of when we saw the film. So yeah, I think the mother thing is something they really do play up a lot in the film, and making her possibly Morgan Le Fay, who orchestrates this whole thing. But I can see that we have some thoughts here on this. Johanna, do you want to go first and talk about
Yes,
this?
sorry.
Yeah.
I'm like that eager student, like, please let me pick me. No, because while you were saying that, Philip, I hadn't made that this connection before. But
Yeah.
while you were saying that about the sash and covering the eyes,
Yeah.
I suddenly remembered that at the very beginning of the movie, I believe that when they're sitting together, it's like Christmas morning, and he asks her, why aren't you dressed? And she says, you go make merry without me, and says something like, tell me what you see. You go and be merry and tell me what you see.
Nice.
And I hadn't made that connection until you brought that up about the sash on the eyes.
Yeah, because she had blindfolded herself. Yeah, very cool. Yeah.
That is cool.
And it does seem that her motive for orchestrating this whole thing is to get him to grow up. I think it seems to be a big part of it anyway. So, and it appears that Arthur is in on it. I think possibly it's ambiguous, like John said in the beginning. There's a lot of ambiguity in this film. So, who else has thoughts on mommy? David?
Yeah. So when you phrase everything like that, it does make a little bit more sense to me in that, so she's pushing her son out there because she wants him to grow and learn how to be an adult, right? But if she just did that without the green sash and she just shoved him out there, then it was more her doing the thing, right? But if she gives him this safety net, this will protect you and whatever, he has to actually learn and decide for himself when to take it off. So although she's pushing him out the door, she's also letting him still make his own choice to become an adult and to make the right choice. Yeah. So I think when you put it like that, it was like, this makes sense to me.
Yeah. Of course, one of the first things he does is loses it.
Right. He's so irresponsible.
Yeah. All right, John, what about you? What do you think of Morgan Le Fay? In your opinion, is she the mother? Or are we meant to assume that Morgan Le Fay is?
I think she is. I actually had like a slightly different take on her motives. I don't know if they're correct. I actually think what you guys have been saying is probably more correct.
Who knows?
But my first take on it from seeing the movie was, and this is just based from the movie, not the poem, but was that she was almost perhaps making kind of like a throne play for Gawain. Whereas because the only reason that I thought that was because when the Green Knight makes his challenge, I think maybe she expected Arthur to take up the challenge, and then obviously it would end with Arthur dying. But Arthur says, "Oh, I can't really do that this time. I'm gonna kind of like give up my spot and let somebody else do it." So I think that's maybe why she gave him the sash after, was to like protect him.
I think that's brilliant. And I think the two motives actually don't contradict one another. She might have wanted him both to grow up, and also she's setting him up for the throne later on. So that totally makes sense. Yeah, that's cool. I love it.
Yeah, I actually had a similar interpretation to John, while not necessarily making a move for the throne, just thinking in context of, albeit my limited knowledge of the Arthurian legends, is, Morgan Le Fay, if Gawain's mother is Morgan Le Fay, she has a beef, as it were, with Arthur. So she is maneuvering all these things to try and get him off the throne and get him killed. So she's using her son as a means to that end. But fate, or I should say the opposite of fate, human choice and free will actually changes that by Arthur saying, no, I'm going to let somebody else take it. And it happens to be her son that takes up the the charge.
So her plan goes awry then. Yeah, interesting. Yeah. In the original Arthurian lore, Morgan is not usually, I don't think she ever is actually Sir Gawain's mother. It's Morgause, who is a sister, another sister. But they're doing their own thing in this film, which is cool. That is totally fine with me. And it's, I don't think it's entirely clear either. I think we all made this assumption, but we're not sure. Because they're not named. These characters are, for the most part, they're not named in the film, are they? So that leaves more ambiguity. But cool. So we also need to talk about Essel / the lady of the castle, played by the same actor who I thought did a great job. Alicia Vikander did a wonderful job. All the actors really, I thought, did a fabulous job in this. But I thought that Essel was the most moral character in the story, in the film. This is a character who does not exist, by the way, in the poem at all. Of course, the lady of the castle exists, but the Essel character, who is, I think, a prostitute in the beginning, that Sir Gawain seems to have a sort of a long-standing relationship with, and she seems to have fallen in love with him. And she seems to have a much more clear and mature understanding of him than he does. Would you guys agree with that?
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. I mean, she's a prostitute. She would know about human nature and maturity levels and stuff like that. You would think, at least. And to kind of go back to Morgan Le Fay / Gawain's mother, it's interesting that debatably she chooses Essel as to take the form of the lady. And when I initially watched it and I saw the lady on screen, I'm like, wait, it's the same person. I didn't expect that to happen. So I was trying to wrap my head around that for a solid minute. Then I was like, you know what? I just need to go with it and see what happens.
Yeah. It's interesting because in the poem, there is no Essel, but we do have one person playing two roles in the poem, and that is the Green Knight and the host Bertilac are the same person. That is not the case here in the film. The Green Knight is played by a different actor from the actor who plays the Lord of the Castle, and there's no implication that they're necessarily the same person. However, that theme, or whatever you want to call that, is applied to the Essel / Lady of the Castle character. So they're playing around with things a little bit here. I thought that was interesting. Yeah. What did you make of Essel / the Lady, John?
I would say that's the part that I've still had a hard time wrapping my head around as to what it's actually supposed to mean. And the only thing that I could think of was that maybe that his mother was presenting her in a more regal way, because at the beginning she gives him a chance to basically say, do you want to be, can I be your lady? He doesn't even really say no. He doesn't say anything, which is kind of like his first, screw up, if you will, his opportunity to do the right thing. And he doesn't say anything, and that, obviously destroys her. But she still gives him a token to send on his journey. She still takes the high road.
Yeah.
But I think maybe it's because, does he not want to be like associated with that if he were, to become king? So I think maybe presenting him with, this regal lady maybe was giving him a different view of it or something, to give him a chance to, this is the person you could be with that would, be a little more like, and he, obviously at the end he is given a regal lady in his vision, and that's the person he ends up having, a second, I guess, another child with. But
yeah, because he rejects Essel as a life partner after she gives him a son who, it's not entirely clear, but it seems that this son grows up enough to fight on behalf of his father and dies in battle and so on and so forth. It's quite a vision at the end we get there. So yeah. So I want to get David's thoughts on Essel / the Lady, and Johanna's, but there are so many elements that we could talk about too, with like when he's at the castle with the Lord and Lady, and she does the painting of him, and that it's upside down. and then later that same painting is in his vision, but it's right side up. So there's lots of, I think there's some interesting symbolism perhaps being put forth there. But first, David, I want to see what you think of Essel / the lady.
My impression was that she was supposed to represent temptation along his journey, that she was, tempting him in some way. And just the on-screen chemistry between Dev Patel and Alicia Vikander was great. It was like anytime they were on screen together, the tension, it wasn't like scary or anything else other than the romantic tension, I guess.
Yeah.
And she was distracting him basically on his journey. He stopped off there in time, everything kind of stopped. But the impression I had the whole time he was in the estate or the castle was, it reminded me of so many other fantasy stories that will have a cabin or a castle or a place where time kind of moves differently, and the protagonist will usually spend way too much time there, kind of lose track of things. I thought it was going to be that kind of situation. But yeah, I feel like I need to go over it and watch it a couple more times, because there's so many things, so many small things that happen in the castle. Like, she likes reading books and then she gifts him one. Yeah. And I'm trying to remember the relevance of that particular book. And then there's just so many small details in such a short span of time. But yeah, for me, she represented temptation.
Yeah, that's great. I think that's a cool interpretation of her character. There's also that moment I found so moving when he is going to go on his quest, and Essel says to him, and basically does the marriage proposal, but moves his jaw to make him say the words. Mm-hmm. I felt so hurt for her in that moment. I felt so awful for her. And there is an anger there, both from Essel and the lady of the castle. There's an anger there and a frustration, I think, because Essel says to him, why do you have to be great? Why can't you just be good? What's wrong with being good? And I love that line. I'm messing up the line, but that's the gist of it. I thought that was great.
My favorite line of the film was, why isn't goodness enough? I was like,
why isn't goodness enough? Yeah. So Johanna, we need your thoughts though on Essel and the lady. There's so much to say. What were your impressions?
Well, I was heartbroken during that scene with Essel and Gawain. Again, that was just, to me, just showed me like how lost of a young man he was. But again, I had so many mixed feelings, because part of me just kind of felt frustrated with him, but also felt like, well, this is realistic. And at the same time, I don't know, just it was hard. It was hard to see that dynamic. And I felt so bad for her. And it seemed at the same time as I wanted him to be emotionally available for her, which he wasn't at all. It just seemed very sexual for him. Actually, both with Essel and with the lady in the estate, in both circumstances, it felt like he wasn't there. It was all just very sexual for him. And but he was also very lost again. And he seems, at the same time, I tried to empathize with him, because he has this whole quest he has to go on and get his head cut off and face his greatest fear, and just everything, all of the weight on his shoulders with Arthur and everything. So at the same time, I guess I felt some pity for him, or with what he was going through. But I felt really bad for her, both in that scene and with that sort of ending scene, with the baby scene, and with the estate scenes. She was creepy.
Yes.
She kind of reminded me of a weird, like, Fiona Apple character or something. I don't know. She just had this strangeness to her. I liked that though. I liked the strangeness. I love that. I thought that was really interesting. And in the poem, she offers him a ring. Isn't that correct? Like,
before the sash. Yeah.
Yeah. And in the movie, it was a book. And I wished I could have paused the movie. Of course, couldn't do that, but just to see what was written in that book, because I just wondered if there were some Easter eggs there or something, but it seems interesting.
Yeah, it seems to be a book about love, but it's interesting because you get this sense of failure on Gawain's part when he leaves Essel. but also failure, a moral failure. But also in the scene where the lady of the castle kind of emasculates him when she gives him the green sash again. And it's a very, there's a lot of sexual tension in that scene. But it's clear that he is not in control. And he probably felt that he was in control of the relationship with Essel. He probably used her in a way that, and like you said, I think for him, it was a very physical thing. He seemed not to regard her as his emotional equivalent. So
I think
it's turned on him, I think, in that scene, the lady. But what do you think of all that, Evie?
Yeah, sorry to interrupt.
No, not at all.
So I think even before he goes on the quest, and maybe I'm misremembering the timeline, but I feel like his relationship with Essel, and particularly his commitment to her or lack thereof, is more along the lines of his idea of what an ideal knight would do, or his association. So a knight wouldn't marry a prostitute,
Right.
like, so he can't commit to her, but he did. There's obviously a desire to want to be with her, because he doesn't say no. So I think there's that internal conflict with him, externalized in that way as well.
Oh, that's so well
agree.
said.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I think that's what I was trying to get at too, like with feeling some pity for him too, because I did feel like if I were in his shoes, it's like, well, what do I have to offer her? I haven't proven myself yet, because in his mind, he has to prove himself to be this sort of better person, or to be more. But yeah, I mean, I guess that's how I took it too.
Yeah. And I think juxtaposing it with the scene with the lady that I don't think we can say what it exactly happened on YouTube, but so it's, she says something along the lines of, you have no honor. I think I have that
you're
right.
No knight. Yeah,
you are no knight. And especially juxtaposing it and thinking about it in those frames of mind of, he wants to be a knight and he thinks he can't be a knight because if he's with Essel, but he's with this highborn lady, and she says, you are not a knight. So it's not about what he does or doesn't do. It's about who he is as a person, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I think that's really a great insight, Evie. Thank you. The idea of living up to social ideals. And there's been a lot of troubled young men trying to live up to some pretty messed up ideals, I think. So yeah, that's a really important theme in there for sure, I think. So, well, a couple more things I want to talk about, and we're doing pretty well here, but I do want to talk about how the film tweaks the exchange game. We have the beheading game and the exchange game. And the exchange game is something that happens in the poem, but it happens differently. In the Lord of the Castle, Bertilac goes out hunting and he gives Sir Gawain whatever he gains during the day, which is, a bunch of deer and then a boar and then a fox. We haven't talked about the fox yet either in the film, the fox element, and the giants and all the other stuff. I mean, there's some really surreal, cool stuff in here. But then Sir Gawain is supposed to give back what he gains, and he gets the kiss on the first day as the lady of the castle tries to seduce him. And then on the second day, he gets kisses. And then the third day, he gets kisses and the sash that he thinks is going to save his life. He gives the kisses to the host, Bertilac, in the poem. But his only real failure in the poem is that he doesn't want to die and he keeps the sash. He withholds the sash to save his life for his encounter with the Green Knight, who's going to chop his head off. So that's what happens in the poem, but the film changes it up, doesn't it? So thoughts on what the film does with the exchange of gifts? Anybody want to go first on this one?
Yeah, I thought the emphasis was more on rather the Winifred, the giants, and then at the castle. Like, I felt like those were essentially the replacement trials instead of the actual exchange of gifts in the poem. And I thought that was really interesting. kind of as an aside a little bit, I thought so I looked it up after the fact because I didn't know, and I was curious what the reference to or importance of Winifred in that society was, and it's Saint Winifred who loses her head.
Yeah.
So I thought that was interesting. And then right after that, his next trial, if you want to call it that, is an experience, an encounter with these very non-Christian pagan giants. And I thought that was really interesting. And then he comes to the castle where it kind of all comes together in a way.
Great. Yeah, I agree. I mean, in the stories, these things happens in threes, and it does get changed in the film. And yet they do keep some nods. There's the fox that is sort of woven throughout, the fox that gets killed in the original poem, but is spared. At least the fox is spared, right? He's just caught, and then the Lord of the Castle lets him out of the bag, and there near the end. The fox tries to warn Sir Gawain, which is something that does happen in the poem. A young page guides him to the Green Chapel and says, "Hey, buddy, if you don't want to do this, I won't tell anyone." The fox kind of plays that role too, I think. But the fox has some wisdom, I think, there that Sir Gawain isn't ready to hear. So yeah, it's interesting. Any other thoughts on the way they change things up? John, did you want to say something?
I think it was interesting that maybe we should touch on is that early on, like kind of almost like video game style, he loses all his items, like he has them taken from him.
Yes.
And then as he kind of goes through each trial, even though he kind of bumbles through them, he kind of earns them back like one by one. Like I think he gets his axe back first, or he gets the axe back first.
Yes.
And then the sash, and then he gets the horse like again at the end. So I was kind of wondering like what, you know, the point of that was, but I think it's to kind of was to make him have to like earn his way, I guess.
Yeah, really, humble him.
Because he loses that at the very beginning of the quest. The first person he meets basically tricks him and takes all his stuff and ties him up. Only because he wouldn't give him 2 coins instead of 1, basically, or that whatever, you know, the guy said it wasn't enough.
Yeah, I think you answered your question really well, actually, John. The idea is probably is that he was given all that stuff in the beginning. In order to grow up, he needs to earn that stuff back. So yeah, that's a great way to put it, I would say. Any other thoughts from David or Johanna on the way they mix things up in the film a bit for us? David?
With the exchange game, I think I have more questions than answers for that.
I think we all do.
Yeah.
For me, I've just been trying to figure out, like, okay, so how does this, what knightly virtue, you know, is this? They're exchanging, so maybe, you know, just giving, maybe, you know, he obviously doesn't really have much to give the guy because he's on an adventure, had a lot of his stuff stolen. So the guy's just like, give me something, you know, of mine. And he does. And then I guess it has to do with giving. And he does figure that out eventually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I would totally agree with that theme. Yeah.
It seemed to me as though Gawain was just as confused too.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how he seemed to me. He seemed like he was just as confused with what was going on with the exchanges as well.
Totally.
Like he didn't. Yeah.
Yeah. Any final thoughts on that as well, Johanna, or shall we move on?
I think we can move on from there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
I think
Awesome. So I do want to talk then, the last couple of things. We haven't talked too much yet about the Green Knight, and it is called The Green Knight, the film is. So we should talk about him, but I definitely, in terms of the challenge he issues in the beginning and what he does at the end, which does vary from the poem, the end particularly does. And also, let's talk about that ending while we do that, shall we? So in the poem, the Green Knight enters Camelot at a very significant time near winter solstice, which is a time of great adventure and change, and when the veil between the other world and ours is very thin and weird things happen. And he comes in, well, later we learn, at the instigation of Morgan Le Fay, in order to humiliate, to test Arthur's court, this vaunted place that is the paragon of chivalry and all the great ideals of the age. And so Morgan's idea is to humble them, to show that they aren't all that they brag that they are. So that's the motive for the plot in the original poem. We get something a bit different here, don't we? When the Green Knight enters, and also I think significantly at the end. So, what are your thoughts, guys, on the Green Knight and his role in here? Clearly, the nature idea of the Green Man is played up in the film very nicely, and the contrast between nature and civilization is definitely there, as I mentioned early on. But what are your thoughts on the Green Knight and what they do with the ending? And this time, maybe we should start with David.
Okay. Sure. I noticed from the poem to the movie, the tone is just so wildly different. The poem, it does seem a little more merry. I don't know if you could hear my dog. Sorry.
Oh, yeah. I heard something. I didn't know it was a dog, though. Yeah.
Sneezing.
Bless you.
Hold on 1 second.
No worries. Yeah. And in fact, if you want to take care of the puppy, I can have John. Maybe you could talk about. Oh, there he is.
Be right back.
No worries. Take your time. So, John, what were your thoughts on the Green Knight and his role in this and the ending?
Well, I wanted to start first off just by talking about him from just his design. I thought it was
Cool.
spectacular. I thought it was spectacular. Like the sound of him like splintering wood when he moves, and that like cracking wood, which like that sound design was so good.
Treebeard's
He looks
cousin,
up,
right?
yeah, he just looks like a
Treebeard's
big tree. Yeah, but I thought his design and that the actor that plays him has that perfect kind of booming voice for him that really makes him like intimidating when he enters, the court for the first time. But I thought he was great, and I thought he was well used because he wasn't overutilized.
Mm-hmm.
I think maybe a lesser movie would have, maybe brought him in more, utilized him more, but I think he was used just enough. And then I thought the ending was really, really good. I originally, when I was watching it, thought that it was going to end as with the vision, and I didn't think I was going to really like that. But then when it went back to, he was actually just thinking about what was going to happen.
Yeah.
I thought that was just great. Like that really that cemented Gawain, character, I think, and completed the test.
We're not given the ending in a way, though, are we?
Right.
We don't know if that third blow, in fact, severs his head, and maybe he's grown up just in time to have his head chopped off, or does the Green Knight let him off the hook like in the poem? It's not clear, is it?
I still don't know what to make of it.
I don't either.
Open-ended.
Yeah. Evie, what do you think?
Thinking, sorry.
Oh,
yeah,
no,
go ahead,
did you
John.
have further thoughts, John?
I kept thinking during the movie about how the game was supposed to, test Gawain's kind of honor when the game itself is not very honorable to begin with.
Good point.
I mean, the Green Knight is giving himself to death, even though he knows he will not die.
Yeah.
So he knows that he's basically going to get to kill someone at the end, or potentially kill someone if the ambiguous route. But
yeah,
I always thought that clashing of kind of themes was interesting the whole time when you're watching it, knowing that the game itself is rigged against you basically from the beginning.
Yeah. Or what if Sir Gawain in the very beginning had not tried to play the man and had simply given him a little dink with the axe?
Right.
That, okay, there's your blow. See you in a year.
Right.
So yeah. Well, excellent. So Evie, how about your thoughts on the Green Knight and what they do with the end there?
Yeah, so I too loved the design. I thought it was genius. I from a title perspective, I actually thought it was a really cool subversion of expectations, because you see, the text is called Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. So you understand there is this correlation there's this duality, or not duality, this conflict between these two characters. But with the Green Knight, you expect that to be the focus of the story of Gawain and the Green Knight, or at least his experience with them. But 95% of the story is just Gawain, and it truly is a character study, character growth, coming of age story for Gawain, rather than The Green Knight. Regarding the ending though, so I watched this movie with my husband. We were like one of maybe 5 people in the movie theater. So it was great. I would say that this was my favorite film that I've watched this year, but this was the only film that I watched this year. So I feel like it's cheating saying that. So, but regarding the ending, so when it started with what turned out to be the vision, I'm sitting there and I'm looking over at my husband and I'm like, this is not how it works. Like, I was getting angry and I didn't expect to get so angry or feel like any like very strong emotions about this film. But I was getting like, the longer it happened, I was like, all right, I don't really like how this is going, but it's an adaptation. But at the very end, when it's all revealed to be a vision, you know, similar to how life flashes before your eyes, that single-handedly, that creative choice sealed the movie as an absolute favorite for me. I thought it was a beautiful artistic choice, a beautiful story choice, a beautiful thematic choice. I kind of alluded to it, but Dev Patel's acting as Gawain, particularly in that final moment, such vulnerability where he's setting aside the sash and he's like, just wait, and he sets it aside and he's giving himself up to whatever happens.
Yeah.
I was on the verge of tears. And I thought it was just so absolutely beautiful.
Yeah. So you're happy with the ambiguity?
Yes, I love open-ended stories. So
cool. Very nice. Well, David, looks like you've taken care of Puppy. So we can get your thoughts now on the ending. And I'd like Johanna, if you don't mind, please, if you would finish us out after David gives us his thoughts on the Green Knight and the ending.
Okay. So I lost my train of thought for a moment, but I think what I was saying was I noticed that the tone from the poem to the movie was different in that the poem seemed a little more merry. The film obviously was darker and excuse me, and filled with tension all throughout. And so we get to the end and you have that flash forward sequence. And I was sitting there in my seat, like I watched it with my brother. So I was telling him, I was like, he picked the wrong thing. He made the wrong decision, and this is what he's getting. And all this, you know, has led up to this, and you see it was just kind of a vision. And I was like, oh, he still has a chance. So he's thinking it through. He's growing and maturing, you know, he's thinking this through. He sees it, he knows what the outcome is, and is like, you know what? I'm gonna be an adult, take this off, I don't need it, and just, okay, fine. And he just accepts it. And my knee-jerk reaction, like immediate first impression of the film, was kind of going back to that line, why isn't goodness enough? Yeah. Like just as I'm sitting there in the theater watching it for the first time, I was thinking, oh, he chose greatness and he chose to try to be more than the average person. He was aiming too high and not focusing on things that should be really important. Like, you know, he had this woman who loved him right there and he ignored her basically. And just, if he would have just accepted goodness was enough, he could have had a happy life with her rather than become king, do a lot of horrible things, see his son get murdered in battle, and then eventually just burst into flames. And so that was my initial impression seeing it. And then after kind of seeing like, oh, okay, so the older poem is actually about these 5 virtues. And this is him, especially the way they've done it in the movie, is about him growing from, you know, a teenager to an adult, learning how to be more mature and things like that. Personally, I like to think that the Green Knight let him live, just like in the poem. I mean, they leave it, I feel like, up to the audience to kind of decide, which makes it feel like a total art house film. It's just a piece of art and we could all look at it and just take from it what we want. And I like to think that he let him live because he made the right decision eventually.
I'm with you, David. I actually, that's how I am too. I hope that that's what happened. In my little imagination, that's what happened. So, but yeah, what you said made me think of just how the poems Gentle's subversive qualities are really played up in the film. And the film is even more overtly subversive, I would say, than the original poem. So, but Johanna, I want to hear your thoughts on the Green Knight, this nature, Treebeard's cousin, and all the ambiguity surrounding this ending. What do you make of all of it?
Spirit's cousin. I love that. Yeah. So I just want to echo what everyone else said so far, because I really love what John said about how he was doomed from the beginning, that this wasn't an honorable quest. That is like, that's such a great insight. It's such a good point. I completely agree with what Evie said about I think I felt some frustration too, Evie. Like I just wasn't sure. I was like, I don't know what I think of this. It was more like, I don't know. And then at the end, I was like, oh, I like this. This is amazing. And I also, like you, Evie, I love open endings. I love just leaving with a question. And I think also, like David and Philip, I kind of want to believe that he let him live. That's the ending I want in my own head. But I do love that it was left open that way. And it's so funny, David, because that was the word that kept coming up for me with the poem. With the poem, I just kept thinking of the word merry. I'm like, this poem makes me feel merry. And and the movie did not make me feel merry. It made me feel like very uncomfortable. But I really loved it. And I loved that whole entire sequence. I loved it because, again, I just felt like this is also why I felt like it had a kind of more modern feel in a way. And I should just, so a couple of things about that. So one is that I thought it had a more modern feel in a way because just the green sash obviously represents shame, and that's both right in the poem as well as in the movie.
Well, for Sir Gawain it does, yeah, for Sir Gawain,
for
not for the people of Camelot. Yeah,
right. Yeah. And so in the movie, I just love how, when the whole vision that he has of continuing to keep the sash, I loved that. I loved how Winifred is woven into that sort of story, and he won't even take off the sash to bed her. Like, he just won't take it off at all. And it's like living with your shame, like what it would be like to live your life with, everybody has probably like some dark thing they're very ashamed of. And it's like shame, it gets stronger the more that you hide it, the more you repress it, the more you don't forgive yourself and don't let yourself have some compassion for yourself and bring things to the surface. Just the stronger it becomes, and the more it just wears you down. And then another thing that I think is interesting is just tying it back to what David had said about, why didn't he choose goodness? Why did he choose greatness? In a way, the movie, that scene of him becoming king, and it seemed like he wasn't a very popular king after war, and even getting that glare from Essel, I guess, as a peasant, looking at him.
Yeah.
It just, to me, it reminded me of The Princess Bride. I don't know if anybody remembers that movie, but The Princess Bride, there was a scene where the bride, I can't remember the name because it's been so many years since I've seen it. Buttercup, thank you. When she has that sort of vision of being the queen, but she doesn't really want to be a queen. She wants to be with, her farm boy who left her. And so she's really upset having this vision of being this queen. And there's that woman, that crone who basically boos her and makes her feel horrible and ashamed of being queen. So in a way, it was weird because the movie kind of reminded me of that scene. But whereas in The Princess Bride, Buttercup didn't want that. It seemed like Gawain that was what he seemed to aspire towards. But having that shame, it just none of it was worth it. None of it seemed really worth it. And so I loved it. I loved how it just seemed like as soon as he took that off, it let go of all of it. He was able to just let go of all of it, and it was all just a vision. And I mean, so much of our shame does that, right? It weaves a huge story in our heads too that isn't even true. So I loved that. I loved so much about that. And I loved actually the very end with that just last line with our green giant there, who basically says, off with your head. And it's kind of like a big joke. And
Yeah.
it also kind of tied for me back to the very beginning of the movie when Arthur tells him right before the duel, right before he goes to chop off the Green Knight's head, Arthur tells Gawain, remember, it's just a game. And you could tell Gawain doesn't take it as a game, none of it. But it's like that sort of like trying to remind him to take it lightly. And obviously we can't take shame very lightly when we're consumed by it, when we're holding on to it. So yeah.
Wonderful.
I loved
Wow,
it.
brilliant words to finish with. Thank you so much. Actually, thank you to all four of you, David, John, Evie, and Johanna. I have really enjoyed this discussion a lot, and you have given me more to love about the film. So I really appreciate it, and I'm sure our viewers are going to feel the same way. So thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure talking with all of you about this really interesting film, and I think it's a big thumbs up from all five of us, and we definitely recommend you go ahead and see The Green Knight, especially if you're up for a really an art film that will make you think. It'll leave you thinking for quite some time. I think that's a consensus here. So thank you all once again, and I'll see you all on BookTube.